The Arizona sun burned like a furnace, scorching the cracked earth of Redstone Post until the air shimmered with heat. The trading outpost, a ramshackle cluster of adobe huts and sagging wooden stalls, squatted at the edge of a vast desert, where sagebrush and cacti stood as sentinels against the horizon. Dust clung to everything: boots, faces, dreams coating the world in a gritty veil. Jericho Kane reined in his dun gelding, Shadow, at the post's edge, his eyes scanning the emptiness. His face, weathered and scarred, bore the weight of too many years and too few mercies. A jagged scar ran from his left cheek to his jaw, a memento of a life spent dancing with death. Jericho was a gunslinger, though he'd never claimed the title. Men whispered his name in saloons from Tucson to Tombstone, tales of his quick draw mingling with rumors of blood-soaked sins. His black duster, faded to gray by the sun, flapped against his lean frame, and his twin revolvers hung low, their walnut grips worn smooth. He'd come to Redstone Post to resupply coffee, bullets, maybe a bottle to quiet the ghosts in his head. But the desert had a way of changing a man's plans. The post was quiet, save for the creak of a wind-battered sign and the murmur of traders haggling over pelts. Jericho tethered Shadow to a post, his boots crunching on gravel as he approached the central stall. A Navajo woman stood there, her presence commanding despite the simplicity of her woven shawl and deerskin skirt. Her black hair, streaked with silver, was braided tightly, and her dark eyes held a quiet strength, like a river running deep beneath stone. Beside her stood a boy, no older than 12, his face smudged with dirt, his eyes wide and silent. He clutched a small beaded pouch, his knuckles pale. "You got coffee?" Jericho asked the trader, a grizzled man with a tobacco-stained beard. The trader nodded, but his gaze flickered to the woman and boy, then back to Jericho. "Best keep moving, stranger," he muttered. "Trouble's brewin'." Jericho's hand rested on his revolver, a reflex. "What kind?" he asked, his voice low, like gravel underfoot. Before the trader could answer, hoofbeats thundered, raising a cloud of red dust. 5 riders galloped into the post, their faces masked by bandanas, rifles glinting in the sun. The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man with cold blue eyes, dismounted and strode toward the Navajo woman. "Kawe choei," he barked, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Hand over the boy, or you both die." Jericho's eyes narrowed. Kawe, the woman, stood taller, her hand tightening on a staff carved with Navajo symbols. "You'll not touch Yiska," she said, her voice steady but edged with fire. The boy, Yiska, pressed closer to her, his silence louder than words. The rider smirked, raising his rifle. "Voss don't take no for an answer. Last chance. Thaddeus Voss." The name hit Jericho like a bullet. The land baron ruled half of Arizona, his wealth built on stolen land and broken lives. Jericho had ridden with Voss's gang years ago, a young fool chasing gold. He'd left after a massacre, a Navajo camp burned to ash, women and children among the dead. The memory still woke him at night, his hands shaking with guilt. He'd sworn never to cross Voss again, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. The riders hadn't noticed Jericho, their focus on Kawe and Yiska. The trader ducked behind his stall, and the few onlookers scattered like roaches. Jericho stepped forward, his duster swaying, his voice calm but cold. "You're interrupting my business, friend." The lead rider turned, his eyes narrowing. "Stay out of this, drifter, or you'll bleed." Jericho's hand hovered over his revolver, his scar twitching. "I don't much like threats." The air grew heavy, the moment taut as a bowstring. Then Yiska moved, darting behind Kawe, and a rider fired, the bullet kicking up dirt at her feet. That was all it took. Jericho's revolvers leapt to his hands, twin flashes of steel and fire. 2 riders fell before they could blink, their rifles clattering to the ground. Kawe swung her staff, cracking the leader's wrist, sending his gun flying. Jericho's third shot dropped another rider, and the last fled, his horse screaming into the dust. The post fell silent, save for the groans of the wounded. Kawe knelt beside Yiska, checking him for injuries, her hands steady despite the chaos. Jericho holstered his guns, his heart pounding. "You all right?" he asked, his voice softer now. Kawe nodded, but her eyes were wary, sizing him up. "Why help us?" she asked. "You don't know us." Jericho glanced at Yiska, whose wide eyes held no fear, only curiosity. "Don't need to know you to know wrong from right," he said. It was a half-truth. The ghosts of his past, those Navajo faces burned in his memory, had pulled the trigger as much as he had. Kawe stood, her staff planted firmly. Voss wants Yiska. He'll send more. You've made an enemy today. Then we'd best move, Jericho said, nodding toward Shadow. Unless you plan to stay and fight an army. Kawe hesitated, her gaze flickering to Yiska. He's my nephew, she said, her voice low. My brother's son. Voss killed his father for refusing to give up our land. Yiska knows something Voss wants a secret worth killing for. She didn't elaborate, and Jericho didn't press. Some truths came slow, like rain in the desert. They gathered what supplies they could, coffee, jerky, a canteen of water, and prepared to leave. The traitor, emerging from hiding, tossed Jericho a sack of bullets. On the house, he muttered. You'll need 'em. Jericho nodded, then turned to Kawe. Where to? He asked. She pointed west, toward the jagged canyons that scarred the horizon. Away from here, to safety if it exists. As they mounted up Jericho on Shadow, Kawe and Yiska, sharing a sturdy pinto Jericho, felt the weight of their stares. Kawe's eyes held distrust, Yiska's a quiet hope. I don't trust you, Gunslinger, Kawe said, her voice firm. But Yiska does. Don't make him regret it. Jericho met her gaze, his scar itching under the sun. I swear he won't, he said, the words heavier than he expected. An oath, born in dust and blood, bound them now. They rode west, the desert swallowing their tracks. Behind them, Redstone Post faded into the haze, but Jericho knew Voss's shadow would follow. The Baron's greed was a fire that burned everything in its path, and Jericho had just thrown himself into its heart. For the first time in years, he felt something stir a flicker of purpose, sharp as a blade. He glanced at Yiska, clutching Kawe's waist, and wondered what secret a mute boy could carry that was worth so much blood. The answer, he sensed, would change everything. The Arizona desert stretched like a vast, unyielding grave, its red sands swallowing the hoofprints of Jericho Kane's dun-gelding, Shadow, and the sturdy pinto carrying Kawe Chuangyi and her nephew Yiska. The sun hung high, a merciless eye that baked the earth and the trio's resolve. They'd ridden hard since fleeing Redstone Post, the memory of gunfire and blood still sharp in their minds. Jericho's scar throbbed under the heat, a constant reminder of battles past, while his eyes scanned the horizon for signs of Thaddeus Voss's mercenaries. The oath he'd sworn to Kawe to protect Yiska felt heavier with every mile, like a stone tied to his chest. Kawe rode with quiet determination, her braided hair swaying with the pinto's gait. Yiska clung to her waist, his mute presence a mystery that gnawed at Jericho. The boy's dark eyes darted to every shadow, as if he sensed danger the others couldn't see. Kawe's staff, carved with Navajo symbols, was lashed to the saddle, but her hand never strayed far from it. She hadn't spoken since dawn, her distrust of Jericho a wall as solid as the canyon cliffs around them. He didn't blame her. A gunslinger's word was worth little in a land where promises were broken as easily as bones. The trail wound through a narrow canyon, its walls jagged and streaked with red, like wounds in the earth. The air was thick with dust, and their canteens were already half empty. Jericho reined in Shadow, his voice low. We need water soon, or we're done for. Kawe nodded, pointing to a faint path veering north. There's a spring near Blackthorn, a day's ride, but it's close to a town crow's nest. Voss's men will be watching. Jericho's jaw tightened. Crow's Nest was a den of thieves and drunks, a place where loyalty was sold for a bottle of whiskey. He'd passed through years ago, when he still rode with Voss's gang, before the massacre that broke him. We'll skirt the town, he said. Stick to the shadows. Kawe's eyes narrowed. You know that place. How? Her voice was sharp, probing. Jericho hesitated, then met her gaze. I rode with bad men once. Crow's Nest was their kind of place. Her lips pressed thin, but she didn't press further. Yiska's hand tightened on her shawl, and Jericho saw the boy's fear not of him, but of the unseen threat chasing them. He trusts you, Kawe said, her tone softer but still edged. Don't make him regret it. Jericho nodded, the weight of his oath pressing harder. By dusk, they reached a dry wash, its banks offering meager shelter. Jericho built a small fire, its glow hidden by the canyon's walls. Kawe prepared a meal of jerky and flatbread, her hands deft despite the strain of the ride. Yiska sat close, his fingers tracing the beads on his pouch, a silent ritual that seemed to calm him. Jericho watched, his mind drifting to the Navajo camp he'd seen burn years ago, flames licking the sky, screams echoing in his ears. He'd been too weak to stop it, too loyal to Voss. The guilt was a blade, twisting deeper with every glance at Yiska. We need to know what we're running from, Jericho said, breaking the silence. Why does Voss want the boy? Kaue's eyes darkened, her fingers pausing over the fire. Yiska's father, my brother, was a keeper of our people's secrets. He knew of a spring sacred, hidden. Voss wants it, not for water, but for what lies beneath. Silver, maybe. Or something older. She looked at Yiska, her voice softening. Yiska knows where it is. He saw the map before Voss killed his father. Jericho's blood ran cold. A sacred spring, a boy with a secret, and a baron who'd burn the world to claim it. Why not tell Voss? He asked. Save yourselves. Kaue's eyes blazed. That spring is our heart. It's where our ancestors speak. Voss would defile it, and Yiska would rather die than betray his father's trust. Yiska's gaze met Jericho's, steady and unyielding, and for a moment, the gunslinger saw himself a man carrying a burden too heavy for one soul. Their rest was short-lived. As the moon rose, hoofbeats echoed through the canyon. Jericho doused the fire, his revolvers drawn in an instant. Kauea pulled Yiska behind a boulder, her staff ready. Shadows moved on the ridge above 3 riders, their silhouettes sharp against the silver light. Stay low, Jericho whispered, his heart pounding. But before he could act, a voice called out, familiar and bitter. Jericho Kane, you damn fool. Thought you'd outrun Voss. It was Amos Reed, a wiry man with a crooked grin, once a friend in Voss's gang. Jericho's stomach twisted. Amos, he called back, his voice steady. Walk away. You don't want this fight. Amos laughed, a harsh sound. Voss pays better than friendship, old pal. Hand over the boy, and you walk free. Kaue's grip tightened on her staff, her eyes burning with accusation. Your friend, she hissed. You led them to us. Jericho shook his head, but the truth stung. Amos must have been in Crow's Nest, drinking and talking, selling their trail for gold. The riders dismounted, spreading out, their rifles glinting. Jericho's mind raced 3 against 1, with Kaue and Yiska to protect. Stay with the boy, he told her, stepping into the open. His revolvers gleamed, his scar a pale slash in the moonlight. The fight was swift and brutal. Amos fired first, his bullet grazing Jericho's shoulder, drawing blood. Jericho's revolvers answered, 2 shots felling the flanking riders. Amos charged, his knife flashing, but Jericho sidestepped, slamming his gun's butt into Amos's skull. The man crumpled, groaning. Jericho stood over him, his chest heaving. Why, Amos? He asked, his voice raw. Amos spat blood, his grin fading. You left us, Jericho. Left me. Voss pays for loyalty. Kauea emerged, her staff raised, but Jericho held up a hand. He's done, he said. Amos's betrayal cut deeper than the bullet graze, but killing him wouldn't erase the past. They bound Amos and left him for the desert to judge, taking his horse and supplies. As they rode on, Kaue's silence was louder than ever. You knew him, she said finally, her voice cold. Your past is a noose around our necks. Jericho didn't argue. He'd ridden with Voss, shared campfires with men like Amos. Every choice he'd made had led to this canyon, this blood. I swore to protect Yiska, he said, meeting her gaze. That's the only past that matters now. Yiska, watching from the pinto, reached out, his small hand brushing Jericho's arm. The gesture was fleeting but heavy, a spark of trust in a world of shadows. They rode toward Blackthorn, the spring their only hope. But Amos's betrayal had cost them time, and Voss's men were closer now, their tracks fresh in the dust. Jericho's shoulder burned, and Kaue's distrust was a wound of its own. Yet Yiska's silent faith kept him moving, his oath a tether in the storm. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, but Jericho sensed the real battle was yet to come, not just with Voss, but with the ghosts he carried. The Arizona desert was a crucible, forging men and breaking them in equal measure. Its endless red sands stretched beneath a sky so vast it seemed to mock the trio's smallness. Jericho Kane, Kaue'echuanyi, and young Yiska, bound by an oath as fragile as the dry grass crunching under their horses' hooves. The canyon trail had given way to open flats, where the sun beat down like a hammer, searing skin and spirit alike. Jericho's shoulder, grazed by Amos's bullet, throbbed with every jolt of Shadow's gait, the blood-soaked bandage a grim reminder of betrayal. Kauea rode ahead, her pinto's steady pace belying the exhaustion in her eyes. Yiska, silent as ever, clung to her, his beaded pouch clutched tight, as if it held the weight of his unspoken grief. They'd been riding for 2 days since the ambush, their canteens nearly dry, their supplies dwindling. The spring at Blackthorn was their only hope, but the desert was a merciless foe. Heat shimmered on the horizon, twisting the air into mirages of water that vanished with every step. Jericho scanned the landscape, his scar itching under the sweat and dust. "We're exposed out here," he said, his voice hoarse. "Voss's men could spot us from a mile off." Kaawe glanced back, her braided hair glinting in the sun. "The desert hides as much as it reveals," she said. "Trust the land, Gunslinger, even if you don't trust yourself." Her words stung, but Jericho let them pass. Kaunlea's distrust was earned. His past with Voss was a shadow that loomed over them, as real as the vultures circling above. Yet Yiska's quiet glances, full of a faith Jericho didn't deserve, kept him moving. The boy's silence was a mystery, but his eyes spoke of a strength that belied his years. Jericho wondered what horrors had stolen his voice, and what secret about the sacred spring made him worth Voss's wrath. By noon, the desert's wrath intensified. A sandstorm brewed on the horizon, a roiling wall of red dust that swallowed the sky. "We need shelter," Jericho said, pointing to a cluster of boulders half a mile off. They urged their horses forward, the wind rising to a howl, stinging their faces with grit. The boulders formed a shallow cave, barely enough to shield them. Jericho tethered Shadow in the pinto, while Kaunlea pulled Yiska close, wrapping her shawl around him. The storm hit like a living thing, roaring through the desert, blinding them with dust that clawed at their lungs. Huddled in the cave, they waited out the tempest. Jericho's wound burned, and his canteen was down to a few sips. Kaunlea shared her own water with Yiska, her hands steady despite the storm's fury. "You've seen worse than this," she said, catching Jericho's grimace. "Haven't you?" He nodded, his mind flashing to the Navajo camp he'd failed to save flames, screams, and Voss's laughter. "Seen it. Caused it," he muttered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Kaunlea's eyes narrowed, but she didn't speak. Instead, she began a low chant, a Navajo song that wove through the storm's howl like a thread of hope. Yiska's shoulders relaxed, his fingers tracing the beads on his pouch. Jericho listened, the melody stirring something he couldn't name, a longing for peace he'd never known. "What's it mean?" he asked when she finished. Kaunlea met his gaze, her voice soft but firm. "It's a prayer for strength, for those who walk in shadow to find light." Jericho looked away, the weight of his guilt heavier than the storm. The sandstorm passed by dusk, leaving a blood-red sunset. They emerged to find their trail obliterated, their horses coated in dust. But a new danger loomed: a rattlesnake, coiled near the pinto, its rattle a warning in the silence. Yiska froze, his eyes wide. Jericho moved to shoot, but Kaunlea raised a hand. "No," she said, her voice calm. She approached the snake, her staff tapping the ground in a slow rhythm. The rattler stilled, then slithered away, as if her will alone had tamed it. Jericho stared, awed. "How'd you do that?" he asked. Kaunlea smiled faintly. "The desert speaks if you listen. You should try it sometime." They rode on, the spring still a day away. But the desert wasn't done with them. That night, as they camped in a dry gulch, Jericho's wound began to fester, fever creeping into his bones. He hid the pain, but Kaunlea noticed, her healer's eyes sharp. "You're no good to us dead," she said, kneeling beside him. She unpacked a small pouch of herbs, mixing them with water to form a paste. "This will hurt," she warned, applying it to his wound. Jericho gritted his teeth, the sting like fire, but her touch was steady, almost gentle. Yiska watched, his small hands mimicking her movements, as if learning her craft. "You're good at this," Jericho said, his voice tight. Kaunlea didn't look up. "My mother taught me. She said healing is a fight, like any other. You're fighting now, Gunslinger. Don't stop." Her words were a challenge, and Jericho clung to them, his fevered mind drifting to Yiska. "The boy," he rasped. "Why's he silent?" Kaunlea's hands paused, her eyes distant. "He saw his father die. Voss's men burned our camp. Yiska hasn't spoken since." The words cut deeper than the wound, and Jericho's guilt surged. He'd been there that night, riding with Voss, too weak to stop the slaughter. Their fragile peace shattered at dawn. Hoofbeats echoed through the gulch, and Jericho's fever broke just enough for him to draw his revolvers. Kaunlea grabbed her staff, pulling Yiska behind her. Voss's lead tracker, Drayton, appeared on the ridge, his lean frame silhouetted against the rising sun. His rifle was leveled, his voice cold. "Kane, you're a dead man walking. Give us the boy, and we might let you crawl away." Jericho stood, his vision swimming, but his aim steady. You'll have to kill me first. The skirmish was chaos. Drayton's men, 4 in all, fired from the ridge, bullets kicking up dirt. Jericho's revolvers roared, dropping one man, while Cohenlea swung her staff, cracking another's skull. Yiska, defying orders, threw rocks, distracting a shooter long enough for Jericho to take him down. But Drayton was a ghost, slipping through the chaos, his rifle grazing Jericho's arm, worsening the festering wound. Cohenlea dragged Jericho behind a rock, her eyes blazing. "Run with Yiska," she said. "I'll hold them." Jericho shook his head, pain clouding his thoughts. "We stay together." But Cohenlea's gaze was unyielding. "You swore an oath. Keep it." She pushed Yiska toward him and charged, her staff a blur as she drove Drayton back. Jericho grabbed the boy, mounting shadow as bullets flew. They fled, the gulch echoing with gunfire. Cohenlea's silhouette a defiant shadow against the dawn. They stopped a mile away, Jericho's strength fading. Yiska's eyes were wet, his hands trembling. "She'll make it," Jericho said, more to himself than the boy. But doubt gnawed at him. Cohenlea had stayed to save them, risking everything for a gunslinger she didn't trust. His fever burned, but so did his resolve. He looked at Yiska, the boy's silent faith, a tether in the storm. "We'll get her back," he promised, the oath tightening its grip. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, but the spring at Blackthorn was closer now. Drayton's men were still out there, and Cohenlea's fate was uncertain. Jericho's past was a weight he couldn't shed, but Yiska's trust and Cohenlea's sacrifice gave him a reason to keep fighting. The desert would test them further, but for the first time, Jericho felt he wasn't alone. The ghost town of Ghost Creek crouched in the Arizona desert like a skeleton bleached by time, its sagging saloons and shattered windows whispering of forgotten lives. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the cracked streets as Jericho Kane, Kawe Choangyi, and Yiska prepared for their stand. They'd reunited after the Gulch skirmish, Kawe's courage buying them time to escape Drayton's men. Her staff was bloodied, her shawl torn, but her eyes burned with defiance. Jericho's arm, still raw from the bullet graze, ached under its bandage, but his revolvers were steady, loaded with the last of their bullets. Yiska, silent and watchful, clutched his beaded pouch, his small frame belying the strength in his gaze. They'd chosen Ghost Creek for its defensible ruins, a saloon with a sturdy wall, a collapsed church offering cover, and a dry well for concealment. Thaddeus Voss was coming, his mercenaries driven by greed for the sacred Navajo spring Yiska's father had died to protect. Jericho had seen Voss's cruelty firsthand, years ago, when he rode with the Baron's gang, a massacre that still haunted his dreams. Now, with Cohenlea and Yiska at his side, he faced not just Voss but the ghosts of his past. "We don't have much time," Jericho said, his voice rough as he barricaded the saloon's door with broken timbers. Cohenlea nodded, her hands weaving a tripwire from horsehair, rigged to a cache of dynamite they'd scavenged from an abandoned mine. "They'll come at dusk," she said, her Navajo accent sharp with resolve. "Voss fears no one, but he's not a fool. He'll use the dark." Yiska, kneeling nearby, sharpened stakes with a knife Jericho had given him, his movements precise despite his youth. Jericho caught his eye, offering a nod. "You're doing good, kid." Yiska's lips twitched, not a smile, but close. As they worked, Cohenlea's gaze lingered on Jericho. "You fought for us back there," she said, her tone softer than before. "Why risk your life for strangers?" Jericho's scar itched, his mind heavy with the weight of his oath. "You're not strangers anymore," he said. "And I've got debts to pay." He didn't elaborate, but Cohenlea's eyes softened, as if she saw the guilt he carried. She placed a hand on Yiska's shoulder. "He trusts you. That's enough for now." Dusk fell, painting the desert blood red. Hoofbeats rumbled, and Voss's men appeared, a dozen riders, led by the tracker Drayton and Voss himself, a towering figure in a black coat, his face carved with greed. "Kane!" Voss's voice boomed, echoing through the ruins. "Give me the boy, and I'll let you walk. Defy me, and this town becomes your grave." Jericho stood in the saloon's doorway, revolvers ready, his heart steady despite the odds. "You'll have to dig it yourself, Voss," he called back. The battle erupted like a storm. Voss's men charged, their rifles spitting fire. Jericho's revolvers answered, each shot precise, dropping 2 riders before they reached the saloon. Cohenlea triggered the dynamite, the explosion shattering a wagon and scattering the attackers. Yiska darted between cover, lighting fuses for traps that sent shrapnel flying. But Voss's numbers were overwhelming. and Drayton's rifle was a deadly whisper, picking off their defenses. A bullet grazed Kaunle's leg, and she stumbled, blood soaking her skirt. Jericho dragged her behind a wall, his own wound, screaming with every move. "Stay down!" he barked. But Kaunle grabbed a rifle from a fallen mercenary, her eyes fierce. "I fight with you." The saloon became a fortress under siege, its walls splintering under gunfire. Yiska, defying orders, climbed to the church's bell tower, dropping rocks on the attackers below. His courage inspired Jericho, but it drew Drayton's attention. The tracker scaled the tower, his knife gleaming. Jericho's heart sank he couldn't reach the boy in time. But Kaunle, limping but relentless, fired her rifle, the shot grazing Drayton's shoulder, slowing him. "Yiska!" she shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. Then, a sound cut through the gunfire, a voice, small but clear. "No!" Yiska screamed, his first word since his father's death, raw with defiance. He hurled a lit fuse at Drayton, the explosion forcing the tracker to retreat. Jericho stared, stunned, as Yiska's eyes met his, no longer silent but burning with purpose. "The spring," Yiska said, his voice trembling but firm. "It's sacred. My father died to keep it safe. Voss can't have it." The revelation hit Jericho like a bullet. The boy's silence had been his shield, his voice a weapon saved for this moment. Voss, enraged, charged the saloon himself, his pistol blazing. Jericho met him in the open, their duel a blur of steel and fire. Voss was fast, his bullets tearing through Jericho's duster. But Jericho's aim was truer. He shot Voss's gun from his hand, then tackled him into the dust. They grappled, fists and blades flashing, until Jericho's revolver pressed against Voss's chest. "This ends now," he growled. But Voss laughed, blood on his lips. "You think you're free, Kane? You're as damned as me." Before Jericho could answer, Drayton reappeared, his rifle aimed at Yiska. Kaunle, ignoring her wound, lunged, her staff cracking against Drayton's skull. The tracker fell, but not before his shot went wide, striking the saloon's roof, which collapsed in a shower of splinters. Jericho shoved Voss aside, diving to shield Yiska. The debris buried them, dust choking the air. When it cleared, Kaunle pulled them free, her strength defying her injury. Voss's remaining men, seeing their leader beaten, fled into the desert, their horses vanishing into the night. Voss lay bound, his empire crumbling. Jericho, bruised and bleeding, knelt beside Yiska, who clutched his pouch, his voice now a quiet strength. "The spring is our heart," Yiska said. "Father said it speaks to our ancestors. Voss wanted it silver, but it's more than that." Kaunle nodded, her eyes wet with pride. "You spoke, Yiska. You honored him." Jericho looked at them, his guilt easing for the first time in years. He'd fought for them, not just to survive, but to protect something sacred. A purpose he'd thought lost. The ruins of Ghost Creek smoldered, the air heavy with gunpowder and dust. They'd won, but at a cost. Jericho's arm hung limp, Kaunle's leg bled, and Yiska's newfound voice carried the weight of his father's death. Voss, defeated but alive, would face justice, if justice existed in this lawless land. The trio stood together, their bond forged in blood and fire, but the desert still stretched before them, and the spring's secret remained a beacon for trouble. Jericho's oath had held, but its true test lay ahead.